What's up, everybody? Welcome to my channel, and once again we're going to do a little bit of a more informal thing with another one of my album tier lists. I do these for the bands that I love. I've done one for Rush, Genesis, Pink Floyd. Now I'm doing one for a more current band. And if you haven't been able to tell by the video thumbnail and the shirt, it's going to be the Smashing Pumpkins. Pumpkins? Whatever. We're going to go through all their albums, and I'm going to rank it. And I'm using the S through D tier. I guess S stands for satisfactory, A, of course, is awesome, B is bitchin', C is cool, and D is dog shit. So here we go. Smashing Pumpkins, starting out with their first album, Gish. I'm going to put this in the B tier. I feel like Gish was a really good start to the Pumpkins, certainly. They already kind of came out of the gate with their Smashing Pumpkins sound with some of their first singles off that album. Singles such as Shiva, which I didn't realize this until recently. That's actually how it's pronounced. Because a lot of people, I thought it was Siva, along with many other people. And then you have the other single, I Am One, which is a great song that kind of shows you the direction that the band was going in at the time, kind of set them apart from the other alt-rock bands of the 90s, which God knows there were a million of them at the time. And then you have Rhinoceros, which is kind of this more psychedelic jam, but it's got, you know, it's the Pumpkins put their own spin on it. And when I say the Pumpkins for most of these songs, of course I'm talking about Billy Corgan, because for those of you who don't know, Billy Corgan is the mastermind behind most everything the Smashing Pumpkins have ever done. The band could have essentially been called the Billy Corgan Project because, I mean, it's all his writings, except for a very few songs, and I will make notes of those when we get to those. Alright, and we're back, and it looks like I just did a line of coke. I don't know if it's this light or what it is, the dust in this room, but every time I start doing a video, my nose is like, let's sneeze a million times. So anyway, back to Gish, which, another thing I want to add, before the age of, rock stars and being interviewed on YouTube and going on Joe Rogan's podcast and just doing all kinds of interviews and all that, there was no way to get, like all the information that you can get now as far as, like, how do you pronounce the name of this album? There was really, like, no video clip or anything growing up that I can remember where anyone officially actually said how this album was pronounced. So everyone used to call it Yish or Yeesh, or, you know, some people called it Gish. Some people, I mean, they called it all kinds of things. I just kind of called it Gish or Yeesh. I don't know what the hell the name's supposed to be. I guess I could have done a little bit more research into that. But anyway, suffice to say, this was a pretty good start out to the Pumpkins' career. There's some songs on here that I could take or leave. Bury Me, Crush. It definitely does have its more sleepier moments. Then it also has kind of some more deeper cuts that are pretty cool. Darcy, the bass player for Smashing Pumpkins, or former bass player, I should say, she did vocals on a song called Daydream. And that was a song that Billy Corgan wrote and even wrote the vocals for, but just allowed Darcy to sing on it because he felt her voice would be, you know, maybe a better fit for that song. And so interesting side note on that. So anyway, Gish gets into the B tier. After Gish, of course, we have technically, and that's another thing about this video, Smashing Pumpkins, or Billy Corgan, it was and is a very prolific artist in the sense that he is always releasing songs, he's always writing songs, this dude can churn out songs faster than a lot of people in the music world. And so the Smashing Pumpkins have a lot of EPs, they have a lot of B-sides. I'm going to try to throw in as many as I can, but I got to be honest with you, I've not heard everything the Smashing Pumpkins have ever done. So the next chronological album, official album, would be Siamese Dream. Of course, that goes into the S tier. That album was huge for the Smashing Pumpkins. It came out in 1993, and this is just one of their just most classic albums of all time. This is the album that most people cite as their favorite, and rightfully so. You have Cherub Rock, which is, I think, one of the first Smashing Pumpkins songs I'd ever heard on the radio. And I just thought Billy Corgan's voice was so unique compared to all the other rock stars at the time who all kind of sounded the same to me. My dad had me listen to like hair metal growing up, so all I heard were these like high-pitched, kind of like more operatic vocals or just corny 80s vocals. And then when Billy Corgan came out with his super nasally, you can ask me again to make that noise later on, and I will. That super nasally kind of very trademark Billy Corgan vocal, I was just like blown away as a kid. I was like, do all their songs sound like that? And turned out they did. So they just, based on the sound of his voice and how unique their sound was in general, that won me over. So, you know, you have songs like Quiet, which is amazing, you know, just really high energy song. Today, Hummer, Rocket, Disarm. So, I mean, every single song on this album is a classic. Mayonnaise being one of my favorite Smashing Pumpkins songs of all time. I feel like this album kind of painted the band into a corner. I feel like there are fans to this day of the Smashing Pumpkins who really regard this album as the quintessential Pumpkin sound and just don't want to hear anything else from the band outside of this era of songs, which is unfortunate because the Pumpkins, they're definitely one of those bands that go through cycles. And one second. Sorry for the quick cut. I badly wanted a sip of that soda and my nose was running again, so yeah. But anyway, every single Smashing Pumpkins album is completely different than the next, and I feel like Siamese Dream was their kind of grunge album, if you will, but with a lot less of that male kind of, you know, masculinity and more of a softer feminine side to it. I mean, Billy Corgan has even said as much in interviews. He said something to the extent of, we're, you know, hard rock without the penis or whatever. Take that however you want. That sounds like a sex innuendo. But no, I feel like this is their kind of grunge effort, and it definitely a lot of emotion in the lyrics. I think a lot of teenagers at the time were into a lot of the kind of bands that were doing this kind of music, but, you know, Billy Corgan's lyrics were a lot more vulnerable, a lot more, you know, softer as far as, you know, it didn't have the harder edge like you know, Soundgarden or the Alice in Chains. It was more, I don't know, it had a more feminine feel, but still brought the rock. So very just a convergence of all the things that made the Pumpkins great really converged on that album. Moving on to their, okay, now it's time to throw an EP in the mix because I'm familiar with this one, so I'm going to throw it in the mix. Pisces Iscariot was basically a collection of B-sides from the Siamese Dream and Gish era, and I will put that in the, it's so hard. You know what? I think I'm going to put that in the A tier. I really like this compilation. Smashing Pumpkins are definitely a band that have a lot of B-sides and rarities and outtakes. So I guess this album was kind of a stopgap. It was released in 1994, right before the huge success that would become Mellon Collie and Infinite Sadness. This album opens up with Soothe, which was, I guess, a single from Disarm. Very like mellow, laid-back song. A very odd way to start an album out. Billy was definitely not adverse to starting albums out with a soft acoustic number or just something soft in general. We would definitely see us a lot more in the future, but the album starts out with Soothe, which is a kind of laid-back acoustic number. Then we have Frail and Bedazzled, which was an outtake from the Siamese Dream era. It's a good song. It definitely feels like a B-side kind of song. It definitely feels like a song that wouldn't quite fit on an album, but is still good in its own right. Then we have Plume, which was a B-side to the I Am One single, which that is a Gish era. And you can kind of definitely hear that these songs are a compilation of that era of the Smashing Pumpkins from the Gish and Siamese Dream album studio kind of sessions. You another good song were Blew Away. My favorite song, though, however, on this whole album is Hello Kitty Cat, which is kind of a hilarious name for a song, let alone a Smashing Pumpkins song. And it was the B-side of the Today single. And I don't know what it is. That chorus, I don't want to be, I don't get nothing. Anyway, that was fucking awful. I might even edit that out, or I might not, depending on how lazy I am. It's just got such a great melody. It's just, I don't know, dude. It's that intangible pumpkin sound synthesized into just something that is so great in just one song. There was a cover of Fleetwood Mac's Landslide on this album as well. I actually really like the cover a lot. Starla, Blue, Girl Named Sandoz, La Dolly Vita, Spaced. Space is a very trippy song, by the way. It's got this really long kind of narration by Billy Corgan in the song, and it's just very creepy. Well, it creeped me out as a kid anyway. But yeah, this is a great album of B-sides, which, I mean, a B-side is still a song by the band, and if they felt like putting it on a compilation and releasing it to me, it's still new material, and it could count as a new album. So, I mean, purists might not count it as an album, but I do. All right, moving right along, we have Mellon Collie and the Infinite Sadness. I have no bias towards this album at all. I'm completely objective. No, this album was just huge for me growing up. I got this album. This album came out in 1995, and I got the album when I was in 6th grade, which was like 2000. So kind of cool. I got the album only 5 years after it came out, so I don't feel like I was super late to that party. But yeah, it was. That album changed my life, man. Like, it was just so mind-blowing. I had never really heard a lot of music by what are you, 12 years old in 6th grade? I had not heard, like, hardly any kind of anything outside the box. Just whatever bullshit my parents played me on, and then whatever I heard on the radio. Now, of course, in my other tier lists, my dad had, exposed me to Pink Floyd and Phil Collins and Peter Gabriel, Rush and all that. But Smashing Pumpkins was really the first band that I discovered. It was my band. No one else in my family knew about the Smashing Pumpkins. No one else particularly liked them. My brother, down the road came to like them, but definitely didn't at first. This album is a double album, and it's Billy Corgan at his most prolific. Not only is he putting out a lot of content, but it's a lot of just stellar A-material content, in my opinion. This is another album that we see starts out with a very soft piano and string-driven intro with the title track Mellon Collie and the Infinite Sadness. Again, Billy Corgan's always the kind of guy who is shunning the rock and roll conventions. Yes, they are a hard rock band, but he will take every opportunity to shun the conventional, okay, you're a rock band, the opening song needs to just kick everyone's ass. They did that on Gish with I Am One, but they needed to prove something with that album. By this album, they definitely did not need to prove anything, as Siamese Dream had already gone multi-platinum, and this album just continued that ball of hugely successful songs rolling. And the balls to make a double album, where double albums are usually not that super successful, and it's a big risk because it's a lot of material. I think before the song streaming age, it was even more of a risk because they had to actually print these double disc cases that were custom. They weren't just your standard jewel case. This was a specially made double disc case that came out, and you're printing double the CDs, so you really have to do well on a double album to even recoup your costs from manufacturing. But I'm sure they did that in spades with this. I mean, because the next song is Tonight Tonight, which is to this day a radio staple. Jelly Belly, which then finally kicks in with the rock, and there is a lot of rock to be brought on this album, but there's also a lot of that more softer, kind of romantic, kind of more feminine sounding quality to some of the songs as well. Then you get to disc 2, because disc 1's called Dawn to Dusk. Disc 2 is called Twilight to Starlight. That opens up with Where the Boys Feared to Tread, just hard rockin' kick-ass song. Bodies, I love that song. Love is Suicide. Great song. Really hard rock, drop D tuning. Awesome kick-ass song. 33, beautiful song. Great music video for that one too. 1979, what can you say about that? Like, that song just strikes the spirit of nostalgia into anyone who listens to it. It's like, I'm assuming that he's talking about like a bygone era. It sounds like he's talking about maybe his childhood, like the, carelessness and the rebelliousness of childhood in a very nostalgic way. And I think anyone who's ever heard that song can just totally get the nostalgia vibes and the feels from that one. You got a lot of great songs on here. Tales of a Scorched Earth, Through the Eyes of Ruby, which to me is like the Smashing Pumpkins at their most prog and adventurous. It's this, 7-minute long opus that just kind of goes into just all realms of sonic texture. Then you got XYU, which is another one of their heavier ones. We Only Come Out at Night, very quirky song. It's almost got like this auto harp kind of sound as the main instrument. They have a lot of weird instrumentation and studio effects that they've done in this album. For instance, In the Arms of Sleep, it's like a 12-string guitar where he's like upstroking the E minor, and then he like slows it down half speed to create this very unique sounding, almost like Asian stringed instrument. And then you have, some other songs on here that were sung by James Iha. I want to say Fair One, Good Night, which is one of the weaker songs. Honestly, anything that James Iha sang on was songs I typically skip because he's just not, his vocals are not a strong point by any stretch of anyone's imagination. And I don't think anyone will disagree with me on that. So that is Mellon Collie and the Infinite Sadness. Up next, if we're going in chronological order according to studio albums, we have Adore, which I'm putting in the A category. A lot of Smashing Pumpkins fans have come around to this album, I feel like, because when it was first released, I think there was a bit of disappointment. I think fans were expecting, the more single-driven, the more singles that kind of came off of Mellon Collie were more heavier-edged, more hard rock, like Bullet with Butterfly Wings and Zero and all that. And then Adore came out, and, you just didn't quite get the same thing that you got on Mellon Collie. And if Siamese Dream was Smashing Pumpkins' answer to grunge, I feel like Mellon Collie was just building on what Siamese Dream did and was kind of its own timeless thing. I mean, I really think that the music on Mellon Collie was timeless. And so even though it wasn't another grunge album per se, it was its own thing that had some really killer singles that fit in line with alternative rock at the time, which was amazingly enough, if you can imagine the predominantly popular music at the time. God, I wish I could go back to the 90s so bad. Music now is so fucking awful. Anyway, I digress. Adore came out in 1998. Yeah, 1998. Adore came out, and I think, like I said, I think a lot of fans were disappointed. The single off the album, the lead single, was Ava Adore, which I think is a great song. The Pumpkins were getting a lot more darker. You could almost say gothy on this album. It definitely had a gothic flair. They were dressing more in black in this album. They were kind of ditching the indie alternative look of their past albums. Billy was starting to look like Uncle Fester, a skinnier Uncle Fester. He shaved his head. At the time, the media, the rock media, were kind of exalting Billy to this rock god status, and he just wanted to basically shun all of that and shun all the conventions. He shaved his head. I mean, that's where the Zero phrase came from the song Zero. He wanted to zero himself out of pop culture and society. He wanted to be nothing to people. So with that came Adore, which was kind of a big middle finger, I think, to a lot of the fans at the time who were just hangers-on, who were just people who were along for the ride. I watched one of their concerts last night from 1996, and the amount of people in the audience that you could tell were just there because the Smashing Pumpkins was the hot band of 1996. It made me kind of sick, and I was like, okay, I think I kind of get why he started doing a lot of the stuff he did to alienate fans, because he wanted the wrong people out and he wanted the right people in, the people who actually appreciated Billy and his art for what it was. You know, Rush was a band that kind of did the same thing. Every single one of their albums were completely different. You know, they released an album, Moving Pictures, that's super successful, and do they stay on that sound? No, and the next album, Signals, they implement a lot of synthesizers and completely change their sound, but keeping that core sound in play. Pumpkins did the same thing with this. The album opens up with To Sheila, which is a very slow acoustic ballad that again would probably alienate some fans that were used to the hard rock. This is now technically the third album that they're opening up the album with a soft acoustic ballad, where you would, you know, your typical thought of the Smashing Pumpkins is not a soft acoustic band, but really half of their material is soft acoustic songs, and people don't look at that a lot of times when the Pumpkins are brought up. But anyway, Ava Adores the next song on the album, which is not a rock song per se at all. It delves a lot more into the electronic and goth aspect of the Smashing Pumpkins, especially the music video for Ava Adore. And I love this period of the Pumpkins. It is great. Billy's unorthodox voice going against electronic music with guitars. I mean, hell, that's dance. My band Dancing with Ghosts essentially copied that same exact formula, adding alternative rock sounding guitars with electronic elements and my weird ass sounding singing voice. I really, really like this era of Smashing Pumpkins. Though I must admit, at the time when I started getting into the band and I started buying all their albums, this album was my least favorite. In fact, I think there was a point where I might have said that I hated this album. But now it is one of my favorites, honestly. Perfect is the next track in the track listing here. I'm still not quite on board with this song. It's a little too like, I don't know the words, like happy, poppy, just kind of, I don't know. It's apparently the video for it was a continuation of the events of what happened in the 1979 music video with the teenagers. They're all grown up now, and maybe the song has something to do with that. I don't know. Daphne Descends is such a underrated song on this album. That's the next track number 4. Just a great, like, just got that galloping bass line, dun, 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 and it's got this kind of like moody atmosphere. Billy's vocals are super breathy and add this very just vibey atmosphere. There's a lot of good songs on here. Tear, Once Upon a Time, Crestfallen. A lot of these are more ballady, but there's always some kind of aspect in these songs that make them interesting. They're not just straight up acoustic numbers with vocals. There's some kind of electronic thing going on. There's some kind of interesting sound going on. Pug is a great song. What can I say? I mean, just the very interesting album. Now, there was a song that was on the Batman and Robin soundtrack called the beginning is the end. The end is the beginning is the end. Whatever. You guys know what I'm talking about. The electric, like the more, hard hitting version, which was on the Batman and Robin soundtrack. That song is so good. I just recently stumbled upon that one. I knew of it in the Pumpkins catalog, but it's hard to. That's another thing I'll touch upon here in a second. But that song was really hard rock, and it combined the electronic elements perfect. I would have loved to have seen the end as the beginning as the end on the Adore album. I don't know why that wasn't included on this album. And I believe it was recorded during those same sessions, but it was just left off as a B-side or whatever. And I feel like that would have really rounded this album out perfectly, because that's the one thing I'll say. This album is missing that one last just really great song, and I think that would have been a great addition to that. Man, I can't believe how much I'm babbling on about these albums. What can I say? I just really like this band a lot. Okay, so let's talk about some of these in-between things. So at some point, the Pumpkin, around the Mellon Collie era, the Pumpkins released an album called The Airplane Flies High. It was a compilation from the Mellon Collie sessions. And I don't count this as a studio album. And some people do. And it's even on this tier list. It's in, someone else created this on tiermaker.com. They include The Airplane Flies High as a studio album. It's a compilation of B-sides from the Mellon Collie sessions, and though there are some great songs on there, I just don't include this as a studio album. It's specifically from Mellon Collie and the Infinite Sadness sessions, unlike Pisces Iscariot, and it was sold in limited quantities. You can't even no, you can pull it up on Spotify, but it's under a different name. But yeah, I just don't really count this as a studio album, so I'm not even gonna throw it in the rankings. But it does have some cool B-sides, especially if you're hungering for more material from that Mellon Collie era Smashing Pumpkins. If I don't hurry up with this list, this is going to be like an hour-long video. All right, up next we have Machina and the Machines of God, or Machina. I don't know. I call it Machina, so if that bothers you, then, screw off. I don't know what to tell you. I'm going to put this in the B tier. I feel like the Smashing Pumpkins were kind of going through a weird transitional phase at this point. I feel like their popularity after the release of the Adore album was kind of waning. And I don't think they did themselves any favors by releasing this album, because it, again, was, I think it alienated a lot of the fans that they had gained from the Siamese Dream and Mellon Collie era time, which, I don't care, and I'm sure Billy didn't care, and I wouldn't care if I was him. I mean, I personally think it's a good album. I don't think it's great, though. The album opens up with The Everlasting Gaze, which is a very cool song. Raindrops and Sun Showers, I don't know, man. That song was always just kind of weird to me. Rain falls on everyone, the same old rain. Yeah, I don't know. It's a song that didn't really grow on me that much. It was a little, it wasn't like cool electronic. It was like kind of more adult contemporary electronic. I don't know. But then we get to track number 3, which is another one of my favorite Smashing Pumpkins songs of all time, Stand Inside Your Love. I love the building of this track. It starts off very sparse, limited percussion, kind of twangy guitars. Vocals are just really direct and just clearly a love song of some kind. But then, like, the pre-chorus kicks in, and the distortion kicks in, and then the chorus kicks in, and even more distortion kicks in, and Billy's vocals are soaring, and I love this song, man. It's just really one of my favorite songs that they've ever done. Great song, great song. There's a lot of other songs on here that I could go into, but Try was another single off the album. I really don't like that song at all. Probably one of my least favorite of this era Pumpkin songs. The music video is fucking weird. If you got their music video DVD they released, I forget the name of it, but it had all their music videos. They had the short film version of this, and I would always show it to my friends in junior high because it was the ending was very disturbing. If you've not seen it, look up Try short film by Smashing Pumpkins. It's bizarre but cool, I guess. I don't know. Okay, so now we have to get into a weird point in the Pumpkins' career. They release Machina II, the friends and enemies of modern music. This was released in September 5th of 2000, and this was an internet-only release, and it was free. So I don't know if any of you guys remember, but in the year 2000, the internet was by no means robust and fast and reliable. I mean, I was still downloading songs off Napster in the year 2000, and like one song would take you like 2 or 3 hours to download, and you were damn happy with that song once you had it, because you're like, I waited so long for this one song, I'm gonna cherish it. So it wasn't exactly easy to get this album, especially in a high quality. because I imagine a lot of sites would probably re-upload this in a smaller bit rate, so it'd be easier to download. And yeah, it was just hard for a lot of people to even hear the songs off this album. So it's really hard for me to even rate it because I haven't had a lot of experience with being able to listen to it. It's not on Spotify. They never made a physical release of it. It was hard for reviewers at the time to even review it because it was hard for a lot of people to get their hands on it. I have been able to since go back and listen to it via YouTube, which is pretty much one of the only places you can find it, or if you had torrented it at the time, which I'm sure you probably still can. But yeah, it's a heavier album. It's kind of a mishmash of different songs and stylings, but it does have more of that conventional, almost the end is the beginning is the end kind of era heaviness. Has that kind of like electronic sheen on it, with Billy's bizarre kind of nasally vocals, you know, over that very metal / alt rock sound. So it's cool in that regard. And if I had to rate the album, I'd probably put it in the same tier as the first Machina record, just for the simple fact that it didn't have any particularly great standout songs. Now, some people say Blue Skies Bring Tears is a classic Pumpkin song, but again, I just haven't had enough access to to that particular song to be able to make the comment one way or the other. It was just a weird way about how they went about releasing it, and it was weird that like that was the last album that the original lineup played on. You would think that they would, you know, I'm sure they didn't know at the time that this was going to be the last album that the band played on the original lineup, but you'd think they would like make it more available, you know. Maybe Billy just kind of stopped giving a fuck at this point. And that was pretty obvious, because after this album, the band broke up for like, I don't know, 6-7 years. Which bummed me out, and I figured they were never coming back. I got into the Pumpkins pretty much while they were on their farewell tour. I remember they came through Jacksonville, Florida in 2000 when I was in 6th grade. I remember seeing on the news when I was getting ready for school, they actually brought it up that the Pumpkins were coming through Jacksonville on their farewell tour, and I was like, shit, I'm just now getting into this band, and they're breaking up. And that's a story with me with pretty much all my favorite bands. So I really, between the year 2000 and the year 2007, when they released their next album, Zeitgeist, I really got into the Pumpkins a lot. I mean, I really like, especially because they weren't around anymore, and I just really went through those their last few albums that they had left us with and just fell in love with them, and my love grew. So when I heard they were reuniting and they were coming out with a new album, I was so stoked. And then they released Zeitgeist in 2007, and honestly, A tier, lived up to my expectations for the most part. The lead single, Tarantula, when it first came out, I thought it was a very hard rockin' song, return to roots kind of thing. I felt Billy's voice had aged a bit. It sounded different than what I was used to. It sounded more crass, a little bit more sharper than the older Pumpkins, the Pumpkins of yore, of latter day. That's not the correct term, whatever. I just thought his voice sounded a little different on Zeitgeist. It just sounded a little less refined, maybe because he had been out of well, I can't say he'd been out of music because he did Swan and he did his solo thing, so he'd been doing music this whole time. I don't even know what I'm trying to say about it. I just thought his voice sounded different on Zeitgeist, but it was still a great album. Album opens up with Doomsday Clock. The guitars on this album are so heavy. Like, there's so much, like, they just have such an analog, like, physical sound to them. They don't sound like digital or this kind of, like, super studio, just tooled up sound. It's just very raw, heavy guitar that's like if you listen to this album with headphones, the guitars are like front and center right in your ears, and I love that. Doomsday Clock, very heavy song. 7 Shades of Black, that very cool song. Bleeding the Orchid is such it's like they reinvented themselves again. They kept their rockin' sound. They didn't sound like that 90s like gothy Pumpkins anymore. It just sounded like a good, really hard rock melodic album. That's the Way My Love Is, Tarantula, Stars. United States I felt like was a little bit bloated. There were some. It's almost a 10-minute long song, and I felt like it was just. I don't know. It had its peaks and valleys, but a little lengthy. I get they were going for probably a more kind of conceptual thing there, but I just didn't mind that song that much. Never Lost, good song. Bring the Light, great song, very high energy. Come On, Let's Go. For God and Country has such a cool, just the beat, the doom doom ga doom 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 doom. Great song, just a great album overall. In fact, I might put that in the S tier. No, I'll leave it in the A tier. No, I'm gonna put it in the S tier. I really like Zeitgeist a lot. Okay, so after Zeitgeist, let's have a talk. A lot of weird stuff happened. So, the band didn't truly reunite when Zeitgeist came out. The band was essentially Billy Corgan, who is, for all intents and purposes, the Smashing Pumpkins. Darcy and James Iha were... their contributions were minimal at best. They were more of the icon, the face of the Smashing Pumpkins, right? Whenever you went out to see the Pumpkins, you wanted to see James, you wanted to see Darcy, you wanted to see Billy. It was like this family. You wanted to see the whole family together, despite the fact that Billy did 95, well, I should say more like 80% of the work, because Jimmy was just, his additions to the Smashing Pumpkins in the rhythm section are just, they cannot be overstated enough. So Jimmy was definitely a huge part of the sound. So when Zeitgeist came out, Billy, the only original member from the Pumpkins, was Jimmy Chamberlin, the drummer. But even with that, you have the core of the Pumpkins. You have Billy doing all the guitar and bass and vocal work, and you got Jimmy Chamberlin doing all the drums. So it's basically like any other Smashing Pumpkins album. Then Jimmy Chamberlin quit the band over basically Billy Corgan's kind of a pain in the ass to work with. I mean, he had already started experimenting with producing his own albums all the way back, starting with Adore. He produced that whole album himself. He writes all the songs. I can relate on obviously a much smaller scale. In my band Dancing with Ghosts, I produce everything. I write everything. Once you get to that point, you get this control freak-ism about your personality to where you're very reluctant to put anyone else in control and give them the reins. And I think Jimmy was feeling that. And so Billy and Jimmy bumped heads a lot, and Jimmy quit the band. He was basically like, I can't work with you. You're kind of a dick. And so we didn't really hear anything from the Pumpkins for basically the next 5 years. So they took almost as long on this break that they did when they first broke up. And I think when they first broke up, people were a lot more upset because they were more at the top of their popularity. And so the second time when they came back, I think less people just kind of cared because a lot of their fly-by-night fans were already way past Pumpkins to the next band that they liked or the next rapper they liked, because by this point we have to think that the musical landscape had completely changed anyway. But anyway, in between Jimmy Chamberlin leaving the band, Smashing Pumpkins, Billy Corgan did a lot of EPs and did a lot of weird things that if you want to split hairs, are technically albums. And I'm mainly talking about the Teargarden by Kaleidoscope albums. He did part 1, which was an online release thing yet again. This was just a weird time for the Smashing Pumpkins. I feel like they had really lost their way. And to a large part, I don't think they've ever been able to come back. After Jimmy quit the band the second time, I should say, after Zeitgeist, the songs they just kind of became more, and this isn't going to make sense, they became more Billy Corgan than they did Smashing Pumpkins. So if the Smashing Pumpkins had a sound that evolved on every album, I feel like that kind of faded after Zeitgeist. And by the time they started releasing these Teargarden by Kaleidoscope EPs, which they're 3 in total, Oceania being the third one, but that was actually released as an album, an official studio album. The first two EPs were not released as official albums, and they were more seen as EPs, and the whole thing's just fucking confusing. And they finally did release them as physical copies, and they're super expensive online if you try to look them up. And to be honest, I've only heard the first and third release of this Teargarden by Kaleidoscope series. The first one being, what did the album cover look like for the first one? Oh, I think it was this little patchwork. So if we're going back to the tier system, I'm going to put this in the C tier. Like I said, the songs just started getting weird. They have a song for Sun, which sounds kind of like this like sea shanty. I don't know if that's the right term for it. I just think of some pirate being on like a ship and a song like this would play. Would Awake My Mind had kind of this rock and groove, but the vocal line was weird. The whole like, oh, 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 oh. Like, it was just, the music got weird. Music got really weird. And I can't even rate Volume 2 of Teargarden by Kaleidoscope because I've never heard it. I didn't even know it came out, and I don't know where I can listen to it. I'm going to assume I can listen to it on YouTube, and that's definitely my homework after this video, but I just can't rate it. The output of the Pumpkins got so convoluted at this point in their career, and just so, I just felt like they had drifted so far away from like their original sound and what a lot of people liked about them that it just, I started kind of tapping out. I was like, okay, this is the point where I appreciate Billy Corgan and the Smashing Pumpkins legacy, and I don't so much keep up with their current output anymore because I find it to not be good. Because then in 2012 we get Oceania, which goes in the D tier. And again, the allergies are acting up on my nose. I'm having to itch it like a madman. I cannot tell you one single song off this album that stands out in my mind. And I've listened to this album countless times, trying, much like I did with Adore, I'm trying to find the greatness within this album. I ain't finding it, folks. I cannot find it. I don't see any song on this album that is worthy of the Smashing Pumpkins legacy. I just, the lyrics, I don't know where he's going a lot of times. These songs are meandering. There's not really, like I said, anything that sticks out in my mind. And I just didn't dig it. I was looking forward to it, and I listened to it, and it just sounded like a sea of noise to me. And this is when we have that weird Mark III version of the Smashing Pumpkins, which consists of Billy Corgan, Jeff Schroeder, which had, you know, in all fairness, had been with the Pumpkins since Zeitgeist. But, you know, again, any Pumpkins member is not really going to be contributing as much as Billy. You had Nicole Florentino, who was I don't know what it is with the Pumpkins and having a female bass player. I don't know if that's some kind of like equal opportunity thing of the band. I think Billy has just always liked the dynamic of having a female band member. You know, more power to him, but, you know, anyway. And then you had Mike Byrne, who had, you know, been playing with the Pumpkins for a while at this point. I think he filled in when Jimmy Chamberlain got kicked out of the Pumpkins during the Adore sessions. Could be wrong on that, but I think he was their drummer. So you had a completely different lineup. You didn't have any familiar faces in the band at this point besides Billy, unless you want to count Jeff Schroeder, which I don't. And it was just, it's just a weird time, and it's been a weird time ever since, because then we get to their next album, Moments to an Elegy. I'm saying that right. And that's going in the D tier as well. And it suffers from the same problems as Oceania did. I can't tell you a single song off this album that stood out. It was released in 2014, and I don't think anyone really cared that much. And you can tell that by how it charted. You know, it charted in the US at number 33, which, I mean, for a Smashing Pumpkins album, ever since Gish, or well, I should say ever since Siamese Dream, all their albums have charted in the top 10. And you can just kind of see the decline in quality. You know, the Drum and Fife is an okay song. Being Beige, that song sounds beige. This whole album sounds beige to me. Again, I've poured over this album trying to get it. And it's not a long album. Not a long album at all. You know, it's only, 9 songs? Is that right? Jesus Christ. I do remember at the time there was a B-side to this album. I don't remember the name of it, but it was so good. It had that classic pumpkin sound, and I'm like, why was this not on the album? That would have made me so happy. And now that I'm seeing here, the critics gave this a pretty good reviews from what I'm seeing. Well, some were mixed, I guess. Pitchfork gave it a 6 out of 10. Rolling Stone gave it a 3 out of 5. I don't know. I didn't care for it. And again, we have, yet a different lineup of people. You have Billy Corgan and Jeff Schroeder. And at this point, Nicole's out of the band. Mike's out of the band. It's just like a revolving door of people. Billy has gotten to a point to where I'm just doing whatever the fuck I want. And that is until the Shiny and Oh So Bright album comes out in 2018, where the band gets back together. The band's back. We got Billy Corgan, we got James Eha on guitar and bass guitar, Jeff Schroeder, who's been there since 2007, and Jimmy Chamberlain's back. And the album sucks. It sucks. It's not good. It's not. I've tried, man. I've tried. The original band's back together. How is this album not good? It's just not. I've poured over it. I've tried. I was so fucking disappointed, man. It's okay, I guess. Maybe it's one of those songs that has to grow on you. It hasn't grown on me. It hasn't. Which was really disappointing. I bet there was, this says Volume 1, so I'm sure Volume 2 is going to be coming out at some point. I'm sure there was B-sides on this album that were, really good, but I haven't heard anything on here that was good. So, anyway, I'm sure I've offended some people because Pumpkins, they're one of those bands that if you say anything critical about, their diehard fans will jump on you and call you an idiot and a douchebag and you don't really understand and blah, blah. These are my opinions. I'm looking at this tier list. I'm very happy with it. I feel like everything is exactly where it needs to be. Smashing Pumpkins, one of my favorite bands of all time. Very interesting career. I wish that they would put out something a little better. They haven't put out anything good in almost a decade now. So I hope they kind of return to their roots a little bit. Anyway, until next time, I hope you guys enjoyed this tier. I'm sorry if this thing was super freaking long. They have a lot of material and there was a lot to talk about. So until next time, have a good rest of your night.